Okay, thank you all for coming. So this session's on OpenBIM. It's a technical overview. Warning, there'll be lots of acronyms in this session. I'll say what they are, but there are a lot of acronyms. Excellent. So before I get going, and if you've came to the last session, this is a bit of a repeat. But I want to thank Building Transformations for inviting Building Smart Canada to talk about OpenBIM and to be at the conference and sharing what BSC is about, as well as, that's the first acronym, what we're about, and also hopefully you'll get some value and understanding about OpenBIM. So I have a long history with digital transformation in the industry. I'm an architect by trade, but I've been with Building Smart Canada for 12 years. I'm currently the president of the organization and advocate for OpenBIM. My day job, I'm a principal at BIM DNA Group. Just very quickly about that. It's really a company, BIM company, consulting company focused on BIM needs of the organization to adapt to technological processes, innovations more comprehensively. A business first approach, not technology first approach. We're just about to release a number of assessment tools. I think assessments are really important to be able to measure competencies as well as advancements over the years. So we're pretty excited to make this available. It's been part of my strategic planning for 10 years. Okay, so the agenda. We're going to talk about OpenBIM. Again, we're going to get right into the weeds here, and hopefully you'll learn lots, maybe a few things you didn't know. So we'll start with an OpenBIM introduction, and then we're going to get into information specification delivery, which is called IDS. I'm going to refer to as IDS. Industry Foundation class, which is IFC, and that's probably what you hear most about when you hear about OpenBIM. Then we'll talk about BIM Collaboration Format, which is abbreviated to BCF. We'll talk about open common data environments, open CDs. I'll tell you a little bit about Building Smart Canada. And then if we have time, I'm going to show just some basic OpenBIM examples, applications. Again, just an intro level. So OpenBIM. So what is it? We're going to just start high level here. It's a global universal data sharing of BIM data. So regardless of the proprietary BIM tool or the platform, right? So it's that global universal data sharing. It's the common language across a wide variety of processes. And it's really enables data over the life cycle of an asset. So in the last session, I talked in a lot more detail about why OpenBIM is important. I'm going to just do a quick overview. So the first that is important is that you can open it. That this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in the long term, we want to be able to access our data. Native file formats are very good in the short term, not so reliable in the long term. And when we think about long term, we're thinking about the length of the asset itself, right? So 30, 50 years, perhaps longer. So because it's a neutral file format, it's a stable data schema, it won't expire or require problems later. Collaboration and consensus. So no one player dictates the tools in which the team can work in. So it does allow for a fully collaborative, open team for your project. And we talked also in the questions just before about being able to exchange the data. So if someone gives me an RVT file, you're assuming I have Revit to open it. So I always like to do a kind of simple comparison is imagining not having the ability to exchange via PDF, right? So PDF means, I can open it in a free viewer. I don't need to have the proprietary tool that you use to author the document. And then you control your destiny, your digital destiny. So you truly own the data because it doesn't live and belong and require any particular tool or format or vendor. Okay, so is closed BIM a thing? So it's not really a term, but it's a thing, I guess. We tend to sometimes work in these data silos. Each project is, working in one tool on one platform, doesn't have lots of choices. This could be a workflow that I'm very familiar with anyway. Not on every project, but this is sometimes what it is. The owner will say, I need an RVT file at the end. And so therefore, everyone on the team has to use Revit. And then we say, oh, I'm going to use, ACC. And so off we go. And we're fully in an Autodesk system. Again, not criticizing. That's common. But that's not the only way it can be, right? So what does open look like? Open looks like this, where you essentially can work on a lot of different tools. People can make the choices that work for them, for what they need to do based on what the project needs, maybe what their business has implemented, what tools the business has implemented, and then able to collaborate and share using OpenBIM. So again, here's the same example, except, they're using all kinds of different tools and federating via IFC file. I'll talk a little bit more, actually. I'll talk quite a bit about IFC just because it's the kind of the foundational data schema and standard. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Excellent. So the first thing to note is that OpenBIM is not a single standard and it's not a single file. It's an ecosystem of standards and a suite of services that are all created and owned by Building Smart International. So Building Smart International, their vision is seamless exchange of trusted information across the built environment. So they're really looking at trying to, through consensus and collaboration internationally, build a data schema that is stable and can be used globally for the built environment. So this is the chapters. Again, if you we're in the last session, you've seen this slide already. But it's really important to understand that the schema doesn't come and it's not dictated by one entity, right? This is a collaborative effort that's been ongoing for many years. Canada's there, we're contributing, we agree with the standards, we comment on the standards as they're being developed. And this happens twice a year. I'm also somewhere, where's Waldo? I'm in there somewhere. Twice a year, the technical experts, the subject matter experts come together at the summits. And again, they're hashing it out and working through this. So OpenBIM is a collaborative effort through a lot of consensus and very important. So again, if you were in the last session, I won't repeat myself with the stats, but we released this report earlier this year, an analysis of international OpenBIM implementations. And there's a stat that I just wanted to share with you that the use of OpenBIM in Canada is very, very low. So part of the reason why is, people don't know about it. So that was what they said. There's a lack of awareness and understanding about BIM. OpenBIM, and that there's insufficient training and education, right? So we're going to change that right now. You can read the report for other stats, just so if you're interested to learn a little bit more about where the industry is at. Also, if you ever get asked to do a survey like this, please take the time to participate. It's really important in these conversations with government, in conversations with the professional associations that I have and others like me have, when we have data to reinforce the points that we're trying to make about the industry. So please, if you receive surveys like this from non-for-profits, this report gets used constantly to make points, to get funding for resources for the industry and all the like. Okay, so ISO 19650 is another international BIM standard. This is more of a framework and process standard. I'm not going to cover any of ISO. I just wanted to point out that all of the OpenBIM standards complement and support the workflows that are outlined here. So ISO is a whole other session. How many people are familiar with this standard and have read it? Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent. I mean, it's still low, but more than I thought.
More than one.
Okay.
More than one.
More than one, exactly. Okay. So again, this is the suite here. I'm going to focus on the 4 at the bottom. The 3 at the top are the services that are being run by BSI, Building Smart International. Okay, so I'm going to explain the standards through this simplified process, right? So the first is that something is required, right? So the owner requires that there's some information requirements. They ask for a building, a bridge, whatever it is, and they describe that. Then the delivery team produces the data, right? They design, they produce the data. And then there's a check. So we have to check against those requirements. And then, of course, at the end, deliver. Okay, so through this simplified process, I'm going to explain how to use the ecosystem of OpenBIM standards. So the first is IDS. It's the Information Delivery Specification. It is the newest standard that was released, so it's getting a lot of attention. And so what it is a way to check for information requirements. So this is real. These are real quotes from proposals where they want, the request is I want an LOD 500 model, or I want an IFC, or 3D/BIM, or some version of that. So the problem with that is that it doesn't really mean anything if you know anything about BIM. So what IDS is trying to do is to allow for the checking of very specific information requirements. So that's what's outlined in ISO 19650. It says, you need to explain exactly and list out exactly what information you're looking for, both in the short term and the long term. And that is written out in a human readable format that then can be converted into a machine readable format, right? So again, instead of LOD 500, you actually say that you need a stair and it needs to have a value. You create a rule, right? A logic to it. So that human readable requirement is converted into a machine readable, machine operable file. And requirements could be like the classification or the materials. It could be a quantity of things. It could be any type of data set that the end user is looking for. And then it can be automatically checked, right? So that's what the machine operable, you don't need to read this, just the machine needs to read it. That's how it's gonna automatically check. So when Mr. Foster's asked how much his building weighs, he can actually tell you because he's been checking that weights have been assigned to all the objects in his model, right? That's the point, is that it can actually continue to check. You continuously check that you've been compliant with the information requirements that have been defined, right? And this is now done automatically. Okay, so that's IDS. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Okay, so now the delivery team is producing, right? So we've defined the information requirements. We have a checker to be able to check that it's being done. And now we're going to produce in IFC. So IFC, I'm going to go in a bit more detail. There's a lot more to it. And also, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings that I wanted to kind of hone in on. So IFC, Industry Foundation class, sometimes it gets mixed up with issue for construction, unfortunate confusion there. But it's a description of the built environment. It's that data schema using Express format, and it contains both geometric data and non-geometric data, right? It's open exchange file format is free and it's well documented, right? So you can go and you can read everything that you want to know about it online on the Building Smart International's technical pages. It's a database and it's a file format, and that's what it looks like. So if you had a Revit file and you exported it to IFC, now you can open it at any kind of free viewer, this is Celibri, and you have access to the geometry as well as the information associated with the geometry. Okay, like I said, open, free, documented schema. And you do this by exporting to IFC. So you can do that in, I don't know how many hundreds of tools have the export function, but there's many. You can open an IFC in a text file format. Again, you can see the breakdown of the geometry, the properties, the quantities, classifications. It dates back to 1995, so it's old, and was built on the technology at the time. It's actually being revamped right now. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but the schema can be opened in a text file, and you can search it and read it. It's not super fun to do that, but it's possible. And it's also been expanding and growing over time, right? So this is just kind of describing the evolution of IFC. Right now, we're at IFC 4.3, and IFC 5 is in the works. So you can see that it's been evolving over a number of years, just getting more mature. So this is the timeline. So what I find interesting is that I still see IFC 2x3.2 being requested as the exchange file. It's old. It's like 2007. There's been lots of improvements. The schema just gets bigger, so the schema doesn't get replaced; it just gets larger. So it is important to try and use the most recent IFC because you'll actually reap the benefits of the new additions to the schema. I've asked around. I think the reason why is that maybe some procurement documents are just like old and they just don't replace them, and that's why it still says 2.3 in them. I would challenge it if you see that. Why so old? Because geometry's improved, the schema's gotten bigger. There's lots of improvements that you'll see in IFC 4 and 4.3. So 4.3 also was recently released officially as a standard, and has gotten a lot of attention. Its main claim to fame is the addition of the linear infrastructure extensions, right? So IFC had been focused mostly on the vertical objects. Now it's moved into the horizontal, extremely important, especially when we start talking about BIM and GIS interoperability. It's much more friendly to that. There's also reductions and optimizations of the file, corrections to the technical problems, improvements to the curvature of objects, and again, of course, the extension, which was major. So this is a terrible diagram. It's the only one I have. I'm hoping that in the fall they'll tell us a little bit more about what they're cooking with IFC 5, but it's a big change. So IFC 5 will not extend its schema. It will only change like the technical foundation of the standard. So the intention is that instead of being able to, or only being able to exchange files, you'll be able to exchange objects and data points, right? So they're restructuring IFC to enable that, but they're not extending the schema, because when you extend the schema, you need a lot of consensus and lots of people have to chime in. So they're going to keep the semantic scope the same with 4.3, but the entire kind of the express programming language is going to be replaced. So I'm hoping that we'll hear more about that in the fall. They haven't told us that much. This is, again, the only diagram I have. But again, the intention is to be able to exchange objects and data points, right? And having multiple authors potentially of any particular component. And this is to enable more additional information during operations, as well as digital twins, to facilitate exchange at a more granular level. Okay, so another very important point, and unless you're a software vendor, you don't actually have to do anything here, but you need to know that every vendor and version of software needs to be certified by IFC, right? So that way, when it exports, you know that it's working properly. So it's a rigorous exercise that Building Smart International tests the tool, like there's a testing process. And so if a tool wants to export to 4.3, it has to pass this certification in order to know that it's validated and can be trusted, so that there's no missing geometry or data when it's being exported. So sometimes what I have seen is that the tool might have the export function, but it hasn't been certified yet. So if you use it, there could be something wrong because it hasn't quite met all the criteria. So this is important for you to know, so that you don't go to too new an IFC that hasn't been validated by Building Smart International. That website lists all of the versions and software that has been certified, or what the status of the certification is. So if it's in progress, it says it. Okay, the other component is that IFC has a version, which I just talked about. So I talked about 2x3, I talked about 4, I talked about 4.3. That's the version. The next thing you need to know about is the MVD. So model view definition. I told you that there would be lots of acronyms. Model view definition is extremely important to understand because you essentially can't, every IFC is an MVD, essentially. So I'll unpack that a bit more. So if we just think about model view definition as maybe a smart filter, if you will. So there's a lot of different, there's a very large schema in IFC. And when you select an MVD, it is reducing that, and it's only going to produce or export out this geometry and this data, right? So it's going to filter it out just the way that those cubes are showing. So if you pick the wrong MVD, you might get an output that's different than what you're expecting. So you should know what MVD you need to use. Let me see if I can explain that further. Did that make sense to everyone? It's kind of confusing, but you have to know what your MVD, I think I have another. Okay, so here we go. So here's Revit. And when you select 2x3, you have 4 options, right? So those have MVDs, right? So the first one is coordination view. The other one's a coordination view. The first one's better because it's coordination view 2.0. It's the improved version, so that's the one you should use if you're going to use 2x3. So that's going to include a lot of content, right? That's the one that you're going to use to exchange, usually to do, clash detection and other things like that. If you use basic FM handover view, that's going to include content that's more appropriate for facility management. And then the concept design one, which is the second last one, is going to be a stripped down version of the file, right? So it's going to include less objects. This got a little overly complicated. So in 4, they simplified it. Now there's 2. One's the reference view, again, a very kind of simplified version of the geometry and the relational representation, the spatial and physical elements. And then the design transfer, which is much more robust, includes everything, a lot more items. I guess that was the other session. Let's skip over that. Okay, so does that make sense? MVD? Yeah, so you need a version of IFC and a MVD version as well. So when you're exchanging via IFC, everyone's doing it intentionally. It does matter which ones you select, so the settings matter. Yes.
Just a quick, so if
Yeah.
I'm the user and I wanted to know what's not included in reference,
Yeah.
I would just go to the BSI website.
Yeah,
and then-
it's all documented there, and then I think you remember over time
Right.
and that kind of thing. Yeah. So again, they kind of simplified it, and I asked them actually at one of the summits like what was going on, and they just said it just got out of hand. That was my yes.
For these MVDs, are they standardized or can you create your own?
So that was the point I was going to say, and then I didn't want to confuse things. So an MVD, like in the last session, I talked about Singapore requiring submissions to do automated code checks. They actually created their own MVD for that, so that the model comes into the code compliance, like with the specific data, the specific geometry that they need to check. So it is possible to create MVDs, but it's not encouraged, I guess, that everyone makes their own MVDs. You know, that MVD is that was created in Singapore is used within the whole country, you know, one MVD. But it is possible. That way you get the same output every time. Yeah. Okay, moving on. So I was asked once why is IFC so complicated? Remember when in that panel? I still think about that question. It is complicated.
It's complicated. So.
It's complicated. Life's complicated. Okay, so a couple of other. So the talking points here. So some people could complain where I lost my data, right? So again, the question is like, did you use the right MVD? So if you use the wrong MVD, you might be losing data that you weren't expecting. Also, was the authoring tool that you have certified? So if it's not certified, then we don't know exactly, you know, it's not validated that it will work properly. And this comes up all the time, round tripping. So why? I don't know. I can't think of workflows that require round tripping. Everyone knows what round tripping is? Yeah? Okay, I'll just say it. Round tripping is like when you export to IFC and then you do something and then you expect it to go back, the IFC to go back into your authoring tool and to be exactly the same as it originally was. It won't happen. The reason why it doesn't really work, or it works inconsistently, because it does work a little bit, is that it depends how different the authoring tool is from the schema itself, right? So if parts of the schemas are similar, then it will work well, but it doesn't work on everything. So generally, that's not the workflow that's being described. It's not really intended that you go to IFC, you change, and then you push it back into the authoring tool. You actually go back to the authoring tool and change it, and yeah? Okay, so just don't round trip. There we go. Okay, so now we finished IFC. So the requirements have been set, and the delivery team has produced and exported to IFC. But we also need to communicate, right? So BCF is the BIM Collaboration Format. It was issued or started in 2009, so it's been around for a little bit. And it's my favorite. I like this one. This one's my favorite because it's about us communicating together, right? We're collaborating. So I remember a long time ago, I used to, write in an Excel file, like a grid line, 1A, can you move this thing over, 2 feet? And that was the painful way. So we don't have to do that anymore because we have BCF now. So moving from a decentralized communication to centralized communication. So sometimes that's happening via email. People will mark up, take snapshots of screenshots, mark something up, email it to this person. Oops, I forgot to copy that person. Emails flying back and forth on the different issues. Marking up drawings. I'm using Bluebeam. I love Bluebeam, but you use Bluebeam and then it's like, what happens when it's still not resolved after 2 months and you have new PDFs? It's a problem. I'm sorry, I don't know what the last one is. It's like herding cats, maybe? That's probably what it was. So lots of issues with collaborating decentrally like this because you probably repeat yourself, forget things, miss things. So the idea here is that instead of doing it that way, where, again, you're describing like I was doing in an Excel file, what the things are that need to change, we move to a centralized collaboration system. So collaboration is the core of BIM, not just OpenBIM, and that you can actually keep track of things and communicate in one central location. So you can itemize all the topics, and if you take the exam, BCF is itemizes topics, not issues. That's the answer to the question. Take note of that, because I always thought it was issues. And then, so it itemizes the items, and then you can get feedback back and forth, snapshots, responses, the status is there. It has a location, and viewpoint of the image. It has the coordinates. It tracks the GUID number. So, in their authoring tool, it brings you right to that. If this is sounding familiar to you because you use things like Revisto or BIMTrack, this is what this is built on top of. But again, OpenBIM is open, so you can do it without any purchase tool. You can exchange BCF files, just the file itself. I wouldn't recommend that. The cloud systems are much better, but there are a lot of them. So, BIM Collab, like there's lots of different plugins. It centralizes everything, but it's using that standard, right? Again, I love it because, it keeps track of all the things. Everyone's talking about the same thing. And it allows for communication to be streamlined. Again, this is a visual of Revisto, which I'm sure many of you are using. Check mark. There we go. Okay, so the other thing, I don't have an image of it, but all of those checks that happened in the IDS, so you're running an IDS check, can get pushed into BCF so that all of your comments and issues are all centralized into one place. So those checks happen and then they can be itemized again all together with your other comments. That could be design comments, it could be whatever other types of comments. All right, and then delivery. So the last component here is about, now we have to exchange the data. So we're going to talk about Open CDE, so Open Common Data Environment. So, they called it Open Common Data Environment. So I think there's a kind of an interest to change it to connected because it's really about connecting different common data environments via APIs. And pushing and pulling data across the different common data environments, which do exist. I've never seen only one common data environment on a project. So it eliminates file transfers. You have multi CDEs on a project, but it's really encouraging the paperless, drawingless kind of exchange of information happening. Again, this is an example workflow where, the contractor, the owner, the consultant team, and the regulatory body have different CDs and they're all exchanging via APIs, right? The thing here is that it's open, right? So the exchange is happening in a neutral file format, IFC, and let's see with IFC 5 what that will look like. I'm very excited. Okay, so that's the whole simplified process. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I have two.
You do?
Yeah, so both about IFC. So you were mentioning this thing about no round tripping, basically. And I know that there are always two confronting visions about the IFC, not the schema, but the file. Some people are basically promoting native IFC, which is
yes.
something that, and then you go to the BSI website and they say no, this is the PDF of BIM, and this, I think this there is always this tension between this, and I know people inside BSI are kind of not agreeing. So I don't know what is your opinion on that?
So, I mean, it's a collaboration. So it is actually interesting to hear the people that have been creating and at the core of it argue about these things. Like, and when you ask them questions, they're like, well, in that meeting, such and such didn't like this. And, so we conceded. But I think the IFC authoring is amazing, because now we can actually, after it's... Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think that that's an amazing addition. I think that there are tools that are trying to align better with IFC, just so that export works better in that kind of collaboration. What was the other part of that question? Like, what was my opinion about it? Like, I think the IFC authoring.
Or your opinion as an internal, like as somebody from Building Smart.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that as much flexibility as you can provide the industry, I mean, we already have a lot of challenges. I think it came up in the last session also on open or closed, or like what's the, I think it's a hybrid, right? Like you have to kind of work out the different options, and being able to author an IFC will be great for the long term, right? So that long life cycle where you're editing an IFC that's, for renovations, is great as well. Okay. Yes.
It's about maybe overlapping. I don't know if it was I think it was in your previous talk when you mentioned BSI collaboration with OGS, with Open.
Yeah.
So they also have their standards. And,
yes.
And you are talking about 4.3, like expanding to horizontal. So where is that overlap between the standards that are promoted by OGS and when the IFC4 starts to try to also standardize, infrastructure in kind of like on a land, for example, when you're talking about land infra or infra.
Yeah.
So where is that overlapping, and are we going to evolve to a common standard that allow us to have BIM GIS, for example?
Yeah. Well, the roadmap just came out earlier this year. I think if you haven't read it, it's worth looking at it. They are trying to align. There's a lot of technical challenges to the BIM GIS coming together. Some of it's process, some of it's the terminology, some of it is the schemas themselves. But I think that they are trying to align a lot better, because everyone on both sides agrees that if the worlds come together and the technology can be more interoperable, would be better. But I'm probably not the right person to ask on the technical detail, especially more on the GIS side. But we'll talk more about that. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So yes.
Yeah, I have a question about IDS. So who should be the ideal who would be pushing for the initial starting phase so that we get to that CDE? Should it be the construction manager? Should it be the prime architects or the chief, where, or the owners, So where are we in terms of getting to that standardization so that the things start out the right way, so that everyone reaches with validation to CDE?
Yeah.
So what is your opinion on that?
So more of that falls into the domain of the ISO standard 19650, where who's creating the information requirements. So the information requirements should come from the owner and operator, but could come from others in the project team. It's information that they need in order to do an analysis of some kind. That's those types of things already are happening, right? We say, hey, can you add this thing in or do this so that I can do my work? But the information requirements, again, according to ISO 19650, come from the owner at the beginning of the.
Them understand that you don't want LOD 500. This is what it should be asking in the beginning. Basically.
Yeah, it eliminates that language because that's not specific enough, right? So if you want to actually have a computer check something, you have to tell the computer what you want to check. So it's moving away from this vagueness, because also that's not how LOD actually, it's about reliability and collaboration. So move more into the level of information need, and it's very specific. Yeah, again, a bit more on the ISO 19650 side, but good question. And again, these are to support those processes. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some basic examples. There's lots of good examples about OpenBIM implementations. And This website, so if you go to Building Smart International's website, they list all their awards. And the awards are documented and everything, and these are just like the best of the best, right? So these are the ones that have been submitted, and you can see how they've been using OpenBIM in innovative ways. But let's just use some basic examples just to open up our mind around the use of or maybe IFC. So again, just to share, right? So if I want to share my model with someone and they don't have the authoring tool, you can export to IFC and then they can open it in a free viewer, easy peasy. Or to archive. So I want to keep my files and I don't want to update them annually, but I want to be able to open a project that I worked on 5 years ago. You can archive via IFC and then you can open them, 5-10 years later. Let's say you don't want to share the whole project. This has come up too. You can export parts of the project. I know some of these proprietary tools are enabling this now. But this is another way. Again, you're able to share parts of the project, and they have access to the geometry and the data associated with that geometry, exporting, and then there they go. They again have access to all of it. Or if you want to share, but you're worried. I know there's sometimes people are worried about my proprietary families, and other things. If you export, then you're safe there. Again, sometimes people spend a lot of time making very smart content and they don't want to necessarily give that away. If you're federating a lot of different files, you can check in model checkers like Celebri as well. And then something people didn't know, a lot of like SketchUp, for example, you can actually map objects to IFC. So that when you open it in another tool, it is actually mapped to the right object category. And then a cool thing is that if you could open IFC in Bluebeam and it's a 3D model, I wouldn't do this for anything large, but it's kind of fun. And then you can mark it up. This could be a gateway into getting people more comfortable with 3D models. I think maybe I'll go talk to the Bluebeam person, David's here, about making this better. But I think it's awesome because people love Bluebeam and they love PDFs, so making it 3D just makes sense to me. Okay, so Building Smart, I know I'm at time. Just a quick one. If you want to learn more about this and about ISO 19650, I encourage you to go for the BSI Foundation certification. This is an international certification and is recognized internationally. It is a test. You have to take a course. Or if you just want to test to see if you know what you're talking about just off the cuff, you can do the entry. It's free and it's on the BSI website. Also, feel free to come and join us in Calgary at the national conference. We're joined with Go Geomatics, having their national conference as well. And that's it. Thank you.